Thanks, Rajesh. Thank you for having me moderate this session. Some very stellar people in this discussion. I think we'll have a good powwow between all of us together. So to kick it off, let's start with where we start, which is sort of the concept stage, which is where we conceptualize a project. And in the WhatsApp chat, it just so happened that among the different responses, Shubhra said that amongst all of you guys, I am the Luddite, and so I was going through some of your quotations, your on your site, Shubhra, and this particular one really caught my attention. It said that technical and architectural drawings can coexist. In the speed of thinking, the mind is trying to record an instrumentality, how something works or is made. There is a world of ideas, I feel, in this, pithy quote, about speed, about coexistence. Would you like to extrapolate this to, your thoughts maybe on AI? What's your take on that?
Yeah, well, thanks again for inviting, and I was hoping to ease into this discussion, hearing what everyone else.
I've thrown you into the deep end of the pool.
But that's just fine. Yeah, I think when Akriti emailed me whether I'd be interested in participating in this discussion, I was thinking a little bit about, first of all, the differences between computation and actually AI. I'm guessing veering, or we are beginning to think towards some sort of sentience, not just an incredible speed and pattern recognition, etc., etc. So straight off the bat, I think there's in my mind at least, there's a little bit of confusion still in terms of how each of us use even the understanding of AI. Most discussions in terms of application and implementation seems to be very much as though they are just maybe better, faster, more complex versions of computation. And so that is one question I have in terms of how is this intelligence generated, right? I mean, we know it's algorithmic. I'm not a scientist in terms of in this field, but from what one reads and understands, that it is, in a sense, though, it gives me a sense of there is always a boundary, because it relies on incredible speed of putting patterns together in order to make relationships, but relationships, no matter how many, because there are infinite even in any context, right? The web relationships that we talk about. And what I mean by that can be very simple in terms of the East orientation and the East sun. We make a relationship in our minds and creatively in terms of the wonderful sense of waking up with it, and therefore the relationship between the bedroom and the East sun is made. This is one relationship where which then, from what I understand with AI, parameters that are entered and also the parameters it recognizes at incredible speed, it is able to then generate patterns, which are then presented to us for selection. Please jump in and correct me if I'm wrong, but this is my rudimentary understanding of what this whole algorithmic computation does. And I'm not even getting into production, but in terms of its what we call intelligence, that there is an intelligence. And I always wonder about the sort of accident, deviancies, deviations from what is the norm, which AI is very good at recognizing, reinforcing, and sort of perpetuating in some ways. And I often ask people who are working in this area, where and how do they account for deviancy? This idea or concept arises basically, I mean, we are all familiar with Amazon. I first started using Amazon because I hate going to stores, especially in the States where I was when Amazon sort of started, where, you know, salespersons are always sort of behind you, kind of expecting you to buy something. And I found this online business fantastic, to bypass local inventories, because I may be interested in something other than what is mainstream in the place I find myself. But what I began finding is, even way back, whenever it was 2003, etc., then based on the selection, the algorithm pushed more and more of the same. And there were, therefore, the anti-same, the difference was rarely accounted for. So we are all familiar with, if you bought so-and-so book, you may like to. Then it began to go further towards others have bought similar books. And all this, where I'm going towards is, to me, so far, it merely reinforces existing, the status quo in a sense. Although formally, it may throw far more iterations than maybe our mind can simultaneously see. They might still be there, but simultaneously see. And I wonder if, as creative people, are we actually working to reinforce status quos, or are we actually trying to push beyond the status quo in terms of what lies just beyond the horizon? And in that sense, what is the nature of this intelligence that we are beginning to work with? So I'm currently less interested in the dialectic or the binary between hand drawing or computational drawing or technology versus being a Luddite. But the idea being that, especially when we are dealing with AI, we are not dealing with computation, Revit, parametrics, all of that, but this idea of an intelligence beginning to participate in a world where otherwise and what this intelligence, first of all, is as far as human intelligence is concerned. And therefore, it's not a question of being threatened or not, but it's really a question of, it's an opportunity, like all good sci-fi moments, where every time technology or the future is presented, it is really a mirror to reflect on our own humanity. And in this case, the humanity really is in terms of, what is our intelligence? What do we understand by creativity, rather than just immediately diving into whether something like this reinforces or undermines creativity, that what is creativity? So I was hoping to actually, and for me, it lies in making these relationships. And with each culture, with each story, with each creative act, it is these relationships that we are sort of either refining, massaging, questioning, and tremendous things come out of it. And that is where currently I'm interested, both as an academic, but also as an architect, about the potential of something like another intelligence working with us. I don't know if that answers your question. I'm sort of
no, my takeaway from what you talked about just now seems to be that AI is kind of catering to our very personal, Amazon box, in which it is putting for us the books and the things that we are kind of biased towards, and trying to push us more in that direction to kind of buy the stuff. And by stuff here, I could mean, ideas or images or concepts that we like, and, kind of creating this box that, hey, buy this stuff, or fall for this stuff. And that is just, to my mind, the ultimate in human being human, because that's, the very subjective thing that AI can pick on and say that, this is your preference. So let me give you that. And by, the prompts that we are doing, that's only reinforcing this, that we are giving certain types of prompts. And I'm going to throw this to Seeja now, that, of course, your practice is very strongly rooted in parametricism and emergent technologies. So are you guys kind of now using ChatGPT to write, very specific genotype codes for Grasshopper? Are you like, saying this is the kind of building I want, and can I, generate a kind of code and let ChatGPT do the heavy lifting for you? So this, I've thrown the same point that Shubhra's made, but kind of on a technical, um, uh, a way to how AI could give us or be giving us solutions and pushing each of us on our own human journeys, but in a certain direction. Seeja?
Yeah. So very interesting point earlier on, Shubhra. Like I completely agree with the fact that we are all bucketed in certain things, and ultimately everybody is very polarized in their opinion. Like I'm shifting away from architecture a bit, but when you think about news as well, right? Like when you think about anything, because there are certain types of things that you start clicking on, uh, at some point your viewpoint with somebody on an opposing side is completely different. It never comes on the same page, because nobody is open for discourse, because all you are being thrown upon you is one particular thought or one particular idea, which is again and again reinforced. So all of a sudden you feel that the entire world is thinking in the same stratosphere as you are. So I agree with that we are really polarized in a lot of things when it comes to our buying patterns or watching patterns and things like that. I feel architects are very late adopters to anything, is at least what I feel. And whoever I have interacted with in the last 1 decade, I'm just practicing. It's an extremely young practice. But when we speak to people, I've always felt that we are very late adopters. Maybe it's because of the people that we work with, who are probably real estate developers or government agencies, who are generally late adopters. So it becomes the process for us to do something very innovative is slower compared to say a tech industry there. So in that aspect, I feel for us as architects to get bucketed in these ideas, there is still a lot of time for that. It's a slower process compared to something else. But when it comes to chat gpt and things like that, it's so we as a studio we do use it. We are actually, like you already mentioned, extremely parametrically aligned, so we use Grasshopper a lot, we use softwares a lot. That being said, it is always a discourse between idea versus what the representation is. So one of the biggest thoughts that we have in the studio is that a form is actually a manifestation of the process. So the form can change if the process goes from A to Z. If we stop at M, then the form is different. If we stop at N, the form is different. So it's always going to be the stopping point that gives us the form. So it's never a requirement that we start with and then we go to it. So these prompts are actually today changing that process a lot. So I feel that when we look at core parametric design and we look at prompts generating imagery, these are opposing ideas. These are extremely opposing ideas, because parametric design actually lets you break down your problem to the smallest component possible. So you're always taking very dedicated quantifiable designs and data, and then you're manifesting a design. But when it comes to prompts, you actually kind of know in words what you want. So even if the image is going to be generated for you, you're still kind of feeding it in, right? Like you're feeding your way of thinking. It's actually not coming from something else. So the way the images are generated, it's actually the idea is a little opposing compared to what we are doing here. But as far as writing codes go, yes, that's super easy. The fact that chat gpt does that for us, and there is some insertion to be done. But again, I feel that's like those aspects of AI is really good, because those are like talking about dynamic blocks in AutoCAD. That's like, oh, I want to draft it again and again. That's very what do you call it? It's a very draftman sort of a process. It's not something that's extremely intelligent. It's just something that somebody will be doing, taking 2 hours, Instead of that, it'll be done in 5 minutes. So let's do it in 5 minutes. It's that type of a process. It's not something that's it's just increasing efficiency in a project. It is not actually adding a completely different thought process in the project. That's not what it's doing. It's actually just increasing the efficiency. So efficiency increase has to be used, is what I think, because we have shorter timelines and smaller budgets and bigger projects. So it's always good to increase efficiency in projects, especially in building projects that we do. But using these things are a little opposing to the general idea that we deploy for parametricism in India, especially in the Indian context, because there are too many parameters to consider when we make a building. It's not standardized. The regulatory frameworks are not standardized. So currently we are doing a lot of study and understanding how do you design with the optimization problems taking into effect the regulatory frameworks. Because so I'm from Mumbai. If you are in Mumbai, you go to Thane, or you go to like just outside of Mumbai, like couple of kilometers outside of Mumbai, the regulations are completely different. So there's a lot of these manual work that needs to be done, which can be automated. So I am more of the thought process that is where this industry is heading, especially in the near future. And the other tools are going to help us just increase efficiency, and it can help us with kind of making the whole process more decentralized than it earlier was, where it was only with a couple of architects, because only they could do that type of work. So that is kind of getting decentralized. The thrones are coming off very soon nowadays. So that is something that I feel this kind of advancements help with.
So from Shubhra, I got the word deviancy, and from you, I got the word efficiency. I'm jotting down the keywords from each listing, so because it will help me, create a kind of a minutes after this, which I'll share with Rajesh. And Madhav, did you hand draft your thesis? Remind me, because I think you are the most ancient, probably amongst the four of us in this panel today.
Yes.
You wrote in
This is the voice of age and wisdom.
you wrote in your WhatsApp yesterday that you guys kind of mucked about to kind of figure out AutoCAD and so on. So where are you and Dimri at in terms of AI? What are you guys mucking about with? What AI tools can let us know?
Okay, so I'll try and start in the context of what Shubhra and Seeja have said. Shubhra, I think it's unfair to Luddite. The word Luddite has negative connotations.
Yeah.
Often the wisest are the most farthest looking are the people who are suspicious of the most recent innovation. So I think there's a lot of things to unpack in what you said, and even what I think Seeja, because you're a very recent, not very recent, actually a decade is like, you're pretty
it's fairly recent still.
No, but I think there's a certain what I wanted to talk about on the WhatsApp when I kind of put down on the WhatsApp group what I wanted to talk about. I think what you said kind of makes me look at what the process of technologization that I have witnessed in the past, say 30 years. And the reason why I put it at 30 years and not 20, 21 years of practice is because I think the journey started much earlier with the beginning of the internet. Beginning of the internet preceded by a few years by the introduction of the home computer or the personal computer.
Yeah.
Now you see, all of us, you have to understand that technologies evolve over time, but what's happening now is because of the advancements in communication technology, the evolution of technology and the communication of it, the transmittal of propagation of technology and innovation is getting really
speeded up
at an eccentric rate of acceleration. So what earlier used to take people a lot of time to get used to, learn, so even if it was, let's say, construction technology, right? So if I were to look at ceramic technology, the first advancement of kind of working with clay took like 3,000, 4,000 years to evolve. Then there was a sort of breakout branch that then became a brick. And then it sort of stayed like that. And it continues to stay there. So you see vestiges of those technological uses even today. It's not, so when you work with a mason, the jargonization that a mason uses was a technological jargon 4,000, 5,000 years back, which has kind of transmitted down. So in many ways, I look at it as technologization as these washes, like watercolor washes. And as there are different layers of technology, and then they kind of settle into that. And I think what Seeja puts in stark contrast, I think a digital native versus a digital immigrant, that is someone like myself, who in the span of 30 years has seen a certain type of technologization take over. I mean, architecture and our profession, even though when it started, I had no idea I wanted to be an architect. I still wonder whether is this the comfort zone for me now? But and hence the dabbling, the mucking about. But I think what I've learned is that, and to Sheeja's point about you being late adopters, I think I completely endorse that, but I don't know if that is really someone else's fault. I think it has a lot to do with how we're taught in a modernist way of uh, building, that does not actually, that appears in its language to be techno optimistic, but is actually extremely structured and hierarchical in its breakdown of what construction is and what architecture means. So I think, and that's in sharp deviance with after the internet has come, the way human thought is evolving. It's not hierarchicized knowledge systems. There are lots of lateral combinations happening and so on and so forth. So I'll come to AI in that perspective. But to Seeja's point, sorry, AutoCAD was not meant for architects. And we were a secondary market. It was meant for industrial designers. So the pet peeve we've grown to have about AutoCAD, about saying that, oh, you can zoom in and zoom out and there's no sense of scale, and those sorts of things are not, because it was not meant to make architecture that way. It was meant for industrial designers to zoom in and zoom out and model in 3D orthographically quickly. And that then, instead of using that and then taking that ball and running with it, architecture just, the pedagogy of architecture, the teaching of architecture just kind of boxed itself into so it's laziness really. That's what it is. So, and then, so as I've seen this technological evolution of the 30 years, the first thing I have to say is, Shubhra, to your point, you see, there is a lot of confusion on algorithms and aggregators and all sorts of jargonization of computation, so on and so forth. In terms of mathematical challenges that this has, these hurdles that technology has crossed to get to the technological point of AI, it's this idea of taking a lot of information and data and sorting it. So the first set of, so even AutoCAD is a byproduct of the sorting of data. So you key in information, there are certain processes, there are certain calculations. Those calculations, the nature of it is sorting. Then comes this idea of computation to iterate, to make patterns. So one is not even recognizing patterns yet. We are just sorting, and we moved on to iteration. And that's the root for most of the parametric design software. It's sorting software. Now, once these two were in place, what started happening was gaming really became big simultaneously. Now, I used to be a video gamer in school. I had a, yes, exactly, pocket video game player. And now you have these sort of remarkably immersive gaming experience where there is no objective to the game. You're just existing in a universe and things are happening to you. It's not even, I wouldn't even call it a social game because there's no one else. I've played some games where you're just hanging out, for 4 hours, just doing nothing in this serene field, and the landscape becomes fantastical. And sometimes you become a flower, sometimes you become a bug. So there are various such avatar type games. Those are all products of rendering of So the software that we use for rendering, even Photoshop, has come because of the innovation in computer graphics, computer effects, in the movie recreational industry. So nothing is architectural yet, right? And very often I find, the struggles we face as a profession in the world and in society comes because of an intrinsic struggle we face in defining what architecture is and what architecture wants. I think architecture wants what all architecture is. So it's a kind of a cyclical,
Loop.
defined globe of ideas. So I think that's one of the reasons why we don't have architectural software. So now from there, you start going into pattern making, and then you have the great aggregator revolution, right? Google, which sorts and then starts making patterns and predicting, and not predicting yet, sorry, because these are all components of sentience, Shubhra, when you mentioned, and then we get to deviance also, because in the context of AI, what's really exciting right now is what's called hallucination, artificial hallucination. Um, so, uh, so, uh, from there, once you've got these hyperreal rendering machines and so on and so forth, now you have on the information front something that sorts, looks at patterns, recognizes patterns, and starts collecting and aggregating, sorting them out into uh, buckets of patterns. And that's the Google search engine revolution that has then resulted in Jeff Bezos's millions, and Kindle keeping on feeding you the same type of. So I used to be a quizzer, so my traditional knowledge system in my brain is not very deep, but it's very wide. So I like to read very widely, and I like to read like long. Uh, and what the problem there I find is that it's a little difficult to break out of algorithmic prediction cycles. So you have to randomly. So if you're generally politically one way, you have to ensure every little while you type
Yeah,
into the Google search term
something opposite to that.
yeah, so that you're asking the algorithm, like,
Mm.
calm down, let's take it
I
easy.
still read those arcade
Yeah,
newspapers because I'm like, I don't want news fed to me. I mean, that's also being fed to me, but at least
yeah.
it's being fed to
No, so
millions
I
of.
did all that
Uh,
news
but
various.
but also
I'm
in a
really
sense,
digressing. I'm sorry about that.
yeah, no, but always, I mean, just, and I'll let you sort of continue, Madhav, but always to bring it back to, so what is the opposite in that sense of our patterns and architecture?
Yeah,
We understand, and to, if you're self-aware that way,
yeah.
then no
No,
technology is threatening, because you
absolutely. This
always,
exactly.
it
So,
is
and it's a
always,
certain humility. It's a
yeah,
certain humility both of the propagator of technology and the recipient of technology, technological. How do you say? uh, Evangelism. The person evangelizing and the
yeah,
person being converted
exactly.
is it's a battle. It's a ideological battle. So I think that when I said I was a digital immigrant, for me it's always been a shiny, happy field of wonder and joy and ever opening gates of opportunities and ideas and stuff. So I'm a techno optimist, because I feel that I think the questions you struggle with, Shubhra, about this comes now. Once the thing starts aggregating information and making recommendations, then the technological, all ICT, information and communication technologies adopted, they are the first adopters of this particular innovation. Now, so you had industrial designers making software for industrial designers, you had gaming softwares, and now you have these sorts of predictive plugins into pattern making softwares that recognize patterns and then predict. Uh, and that actually is a retail business model that Google very quickly became Google Services. It didn't become Google Academy so much. Google Books is not really the ideal place to hunt for books. Uh, it's not really it's not oriented that way. And I think those motivations direct design and architecture also in a larger sense of the thing. Where is money? Who is interested in what type of resource consumption, for example? Where in the context of, say, the end of the world, climate change, apocalypse, who is taking us down the dirty path to hell? So that question is always a difficult. It's a secret. No one wants to talk about it. hopefully, eventually AI will be blatant about it, and it will be inescapable as to who is actually responsible for the mess we are in. No, but I think that AI now opens up a thing. And being a digital immigrant, being someone who's techno optimist, my approach has been that, one of the greatest things that happened after the internet came in, I noticed, was stuff that you bought, like gadgets, their user manual started getting compressed further and further, which meant that the gadget interface started being more savvy to how humans would like to receive information. And that gives me a lot of hope in many ways, because then it lays bare this thing that, is the machine making us behave badly, or are we just behaving badly with the machine? And that's the ultimate question, for which I think the answer has been ideologically protected and ideologically challenged, or sought, uh, uh, over many centuries, many centuries. So that when you say Luddite, that's why I started off with you, and I said that, that's the biggest challenge of our time is not the challenges to creation or creativity. It's that the end is nigh. We are getting to a state where no amount of articulation, imagination, expression can get us out of the hole of resource gaps, the whole of climate change at a scale which is like, yeah, apocalyptic, like end of universe types. Like it's like species extinction, biodiversity loss. There are questions for which answers are not uh, going to come out of iterations of what we already know. That's the thing, that when you use Chat GPT, it feels a little odd unless you think about it in a particular way. It feels strange and creepy unless you think about it a particular way. What GPT is generative AI. When AI is generating on its own,
It's
having
learning from every past.
what is that learning? It is actually got the whole universe of information at its beck and call, or will eventually have, and then will come up to speed and then start learning on a live update manner. It is responding to your input or prompt. That's another critical thing. You have to prompt an AI. AI is on verbal diarrhea. It's not just going yabba, 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 like me right now. It's not just going dabba, 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 and people are taking notes. It's not like that. It's really, it is, it's, you give it a prompt and it says, looks at it in very cold logic actually, and says, in the universe of information, what is the
Some
most,
buzzing going on the back end. Is everybody hearing that?
yeah, I think,
Right?
Ankon, I think it's your other.
Yeah, your
Sorted.
Sorry, I'll just
yeah,
finish very quickly, because this is the thing about being a digital immigrant, is that everything is a wonderful new universe. But the thing is that it is looking at this universe of information and saying, this is the most common response to what you are asking me to do. It's saying, I will not come to you with an answer that says, I don't know. you know, that's a very interesting characteristic of generative AI, is that unlike the Google searches that says no search result, or the HTTP code which says 404 network error, there are no unfilled gaps of information, because, like me, not being a technologist, I'm willing to go on blabbing about technology like this. It's a human instinct to kind of get carried away in future scoping our mental capacity. And very often we leave those things open-ended. And when we design, this is the thing, we never design for the past. We try and rely on wisdom that is collected from the past. We try and referentially look at the past. But our basic job is completely speculative. It is completely futuristic. And therefore, that struggle that we feel that, oh, am I looking far enough into the crystal ball, or am I just scratching the surface of the crystal ball? Is an existential crisis of all designers, I feel, from time immemorial.
Yeah, and I think also, but it's I mean, I like the word optimism, but I would use it independently of whether it's technology or anything else. In fact, I don't think there's anything opposing to technology. I use the word Luddite only in response to in our WhatsApp chat to just make the point that I use computation, but I'm not sure I use AI.
Sorry, Shubhra. I think Ankon, your non-video input, no? Can you just put that on mute? I think that's the thing that's buzzing.
Now it's not. It's
Yeah, it's
fine.
buzzing, it's buzzing.
Yeah,
Now
it's buzzing
now
quite a
it's-
lot, actually.
Yeah, a lot actually.
Um, but it's really quite interesting that in two things in what you were talking about, Madhav, and then also something that ties it back to Seeja's conversation. One is, yeah, this idea of there are two things that you were talking about. One is an optimism, which I think drives all of us. And that optimism is, in a sense, because the optimism and anticipation are sort of at the heart of everything we do, no? Even when we are designing, it is not to address a future, but it is in the anticipation of it. There's a subtle but a very profound difference in the two. Because if we already knew it, it would be the present in that sense. But the other thing is also this thing about we iterate in order to examine. And so whether it is the human mind that is iterating, whether it is the human mind with the aid of something, or whether it is the human mind that defers iteration to any of the three or any combinations in between, at the end of the day, I suppose I'm more interested in who or where does the examination and the reflection on the iterations take place so that we know the next step. So that's exciting. Now, if something gives iterations more rapidly, that's great. But sometimes you also need to slow it down. I'm only talking in terms of the design process, and it's a back and forth. So I always believe in a sense of overlaying, which an architectural firm who were also one or two of them were my teachers, called overdrawing. You never dismiss one technology because, like you were saying, Madhav, we have these patinas of technology with us. And the most fruitful sort of reflections and self-examination comes when we overlay. So they used to call, even when I was a grad student and even now, it is that we are constantly going back and forth between worlds. And that is a tremendous privilege, which currently I don't know whether AI has or not. And I'm talking about it like a being, but maybe because I've read too much sci-fi. But at the heart of it also lies the question of intentions, which is also something you brought up, Madhav. In order to feed parameters, I think you used another word, but
Prompts.
Prompts, yes, thanks. What are your motivations and intentions? And that is a tremendously humanistic way of thinking, no? It's philosophical. What do you understand by being a good human being? Therefore, what are good intentions, or what are noble intentions? What are ethical intentions? And currently our interface with AI, we can't let go of that. And that's where my whole sort of pondering over over this, how do we even define creativity? What is creativity? Where do ideas come from? That these are questions we carry with us when we each time engage with a new technology, which is not pessimistic. It is just, in a sense, trying to never let go of a self-awareness. Because otherwise, yes, you become, you defer all responsibility and accountability to something external to you. And I think when you do that is when fear begins to creep in. And you have all these dystopian ways of thinking about AI taking over, a la Matrix or any other way. But I think that is really a symptom of letting go of that awareness to something external to you. So every time there is a new technology, it is, I always rely on this notion of overdrawing. And it's in this overdrawing that slippages and these accidents occur, which are the unexpected, like hallucinations that you talked about in terms of AI. That is what deviancy in our own mind is. In a sense, it is a mirror. It is something which was unexpected, unanticipated, but suddenly it's there, and becomes part of our reality. Something I wanted to go back to Seeja's discussion is when we talk about efficiency and especially a certain universality, we're talking about at a very prosaic way, regulations, right? That regulations change, building cultures change from site to site. I mean, part of the reason fields like architecture are just much bigger ships in terms of their movements, that each little movement actually has profound implications, is because our range is tremendous. And if we discount that range, then what we are saying is we are universalizing, because if we are working with a certain set of programs, then we want that homogeneous, right? It can't handle as many unexpected parameters, because we are incapable of imagining unexpected parameters in order to provide the prompts. But the milieu which we work within ranges. And currently, the narrative of efficiency sometimes wants to homogenize those tremendous variations I'm talking about. And intelligences are not just one way. Sometimes there are site intelligences which then feed back in completely unexpected ways. And so this intelligence loops that we are talking about happen anyway, whether they are with AI, with the human mind, or in conjunction. But when you were saying something, one of the things that sort of was a prompt to think in my mind was, currently with computation and programs, that's the singular sort of something that we haven't dealt with. If there's a power outage and our computers can't work, are we still capable of keeping the communication of a project alive? And to me, these questions are just, again, they are like games, and they're like plays in real life, like that what keeps communication alive, respective of the medium which we are engaged in. And the other thing in talking about games, and again, it's this interface of self-awareness and a certain philosophy of being, is I used to actually date a game designer for a long time, but not the one who was the visualizing part of the design, but actually the one who worked with game mechanics. And irrespective of whether it was a tabletop game, old school, as we call it, or a video game, complete with VR, the question at the end of the day remained the same. What makes a game engaging and interesting? And at what stage you're likely to get bored with a game? If a quest is impossible and you as a player get a sense that, oh, there is a kink in this, you will lose interest. So the game mechanics remain the same. Isn't that incredible? Because currently the human mind, the way it, she, he, whatever inhabits reality hasn't changed or endures. So at the heart of it, I keep coming back in terms of architecture, is what are those relationships, those mechanisms that endure, irrespective of which technology, which is a medium and a mode of thinking, what are we thinking?
Yeah, I feel there is this whole thing. I'm happy you spoke about how we want. So there is this whole culture of instant gratification, right? Today, like I'm coming from that generation who just started getting it when, say, like around a decade back. Before that, I could still wait for my gifts. I didn't get instant gratification ever. So I've kind of overlapped on both the sides of it. And architecture is anything but instant gratification. Like the architects who work on it, when they work on it, their thought process versus say with all the problems that we have in construction, it takes 4 years for a project to be built, and by the end of the 4th year, you're kind of another human being, because you are getting so much information, your thought process is changing. So at the end of the 4th year, when your project actually stands there, either you will still love it or you might not. But that's not even the point I'm trying to make. The thing is that we are really looking for something that gives us the result very quickly, because that's what we are doing on every other aspect of our life. You don't have to wait for anything else. So that's one of the reasons I started doing pottery, because when I was making structures and sculptures, I realized that it's taking so much time, and my creative process is being hampered there. So I started doing pottery, and at the end of the 2 hours, when you make a pot or you make some object, that gratification is very different. So I felt that once I actually started doing that, I didn't realize this is why I'm starting it. But post the process, I realized, oh, this is the difference that I'm feeling in both of these things, you know. So one of the things that we speak about, that we are actually making something for the future while being in the present, and the future is continuously changing. So you're making something static for an ever-changing future. So it's a complicated thing on its own. And that is something that took a while for me to even grasp or understand. I don't think I still understand it, but that's something that took a very long time, you know, to even get and wrap my head around. And
Seeja, to stick with that analogy, the real question is, if you stick with the pottery analogy,
yeah,
is the architecture the potter's wheel, or is architecture the pot?
yeah,
No, I mean,
it's
that's
worth
sense.
thinking about. That's true. That's true.
And if it is the potter's wheel, then in our discipline, what is the analogous of the pot? And perhaps it is, I don't know. But sorry to interrupt. I was just
it's very exciting, because I've seen the two things work together, and I have seen what it makes me feel. What I have actually just thought about is why is it that this type of, so everything else in the world is moving at an alarming rate, and then all of a sudden you have this project that you're making, and after a certain amount of time you're feeling, oh, did I make this correctly? But it's already built, so now what do I do? And this thing that I've built is going to be here for another 50 to 80 years. So why did I do that? You know, so it's a big challenge. And I feel in this whole, especially because I'm in Mumbai since the last 8 years, once I'm back, I've been here, like stationed in this city and practicing in the city. After a while, it feels that, are we building so much, and why are we building so much? Because there is, the transport system is completely collapsing on a daily basis. Due to construction, people are getting health problems, and it's become very rampant now. Mumbai was the most polluted city in the world last year for a couple of days, and it was never the case, because we actually have proximity to the sea, so we shouldn't be that polluted. So the point is that construction is making us actually think that, do we even construct anymore? And as a young architect, I don't think I have that particular voice or even a choice in that matter. I have to construct. But at certain discourses, we keep talking about it, that what do we construct and how do we construct? So those are also very important conversations today, especially because it's going to be even more easier to make things. You know, things are becoming easier. Like for example, earlier when they used to be like, I'm a big fan of animated films, and again I'm digressing a little, but earlier when we used to watch an animated film, it used to have so much soul. Even a movie for that matter, it used to be so, it was very difficult to make that movie, because there was a reel that was going to get exhausted. The animators had to actually use certain amount of time. There was a lot of such problems in real life, real motion pictures as well as animation. Today, the fact that movie making and animations have become so easy, if you look at the storyline, that has gone down all of a sudden, because it's so easy to do. So the fact that something becoming very achievable and doable versus the integrity that it is done with is very lopsided at all times. So how do we counter that with something like AI coming into the picture, which is going to make it even more easier? So is it going to become even more lopsided? That's something that, you know, keeps us talking about this particular topic.
So actually, this talk about doomsday at one end, optimism at the other end, speed, and do we need the speed? You know, the question that you're raising. And here's a little bit of, you can look at this AI software tool called Xcool, Xkaol, developed by this young chap called Wan Yu He. He's from China. And this software is literally allowing, single person architecture firms to now, compete with traditionally large firms the size of Norman Foster and all on that scale of projects. He's built this plethora of tool sets in the software where literally from, the BIM to all manner of, rendering and things can simply be done with Xtool. There's a lot of chat rooms are buzzing with this, talk of the young architects, talking about Xtool and how they don't now need to kind of have large firms. But the other point of the speed aspect of it, one is of course, the jobs going, lots of jobs going, lot of architects not being able to find traditional jobs as architects because now proprietors of architecture firms saying I am okay with just 3-4 people in my team. I can actually handle large projects and I don't need a lot of people. So that's the architects will have to think, what can I do to kind of, that's the gap that Madhav's also talking about between reality and, us talking about, all the deep philosophy of AI. Iski पेट कैसे भरेगा? How is the architect going to make his bread and butter? And in that, I mean, uh, these things, for instance, now for many things, you don't need a surveyor. There are these floor plan apps and these room sketcher apps. Literally with your phone, you can go around and, it gives you a pretty accurate measurement of the space. A lot of interns are now using this in our studio, where pretty much they are done with very complex documentation of a very large space very quickly. So this, I want to dwell a little bit on the doomsday aspect of this, that there is this significant gap of and it's not, I mean, of course people say optimistically, you can say that there will be new roles that will come and there'll be people who have to maintain the robots and maintain the AI and all of that. So I want you guys to kind of weigh in on this one. And the second is that on the speed aspect of thing and on the fact that, Seeja is saying that we are building too much and there's too much pollution and do we really need to build that much? But a lot of people who are moving into Mumbai for jobs, for livelihood, they need accommodation and they need houses, right? So you need construction. But buildings are being built for the upper middle class and the super rich. They are not being built at that speed for, the EWS. So the huge disconnect, and AI will be used more and more to build for even more, for the rich folks, because that's where people who are using the AI will get paid for, because you're not get paid to build for creating solutions at the urban scale for affordable housing, for instance, or maybe you will be. So those kind of conversations can we steer AI in the direction where it's actually an enabling tool for solving real world problems rather than being a toy for us to kind of delve more and more and running away more and more from realities, because the more we run away from the reality of where we live, how we live, and Shubhra saying, light chali jati hai, so then, how is AI useful? How do you still maintain communication? Light chali jati hai, so, how do you stop building buildings? And what kind of buildings also? And can AI be useful in that? So those are some questions I want you to guys to do some future scoping maybe, and maybe say that this is one way AI could be useful, because ultimately I want it should be an optimistic tone on which we say that AI can do stuff for us, but this is how we would like AI to do things. And none of us are technologists, unfortunately, so we can't weigh in on the technical directions that AI is going to take. but we all have wish lists, right? What we would like AI to do. And there are a bunch of things where a little bit of research yesterday, day before, when they approached me saying be the moderator. I said, okay, send me a list of stuff, and the Architecture Live, they've actually put together some interesting things where AI could be useful. For instance, in conservation, having predictive maintenance tools, for instance, or documentation of existing heritage, for instance, where AI could be very useful. Photogrammetry is already something where AI is being used to kind of document our heritage at a very deep level. In sustainable design, energy efficiency, for instance, you can pretty much automate a lot of building performance reviews by using AI, for instance. So I'm just throwing a bunch of these things at you guys. I'm going to shut up after this for quite a bit and let the drawing room conversation flow between three of you. But I'm just trying to steer the conversation from the underlying philosophical, kind of pinnings into the real world scenario where we kind of project and say that, as architects, we would like AI to be able to do these things, and that so that people who are watching this on YouTube later, they start getting some ideas in terms of this. So the AI is not pushing us to think, but we are pushing AI to kind of do these things which we would like AI to do. I'm going to shut up now and let you guys start on this. Any of you, whoever wants to start rolling on this. Thanks.
Okay. So I think I'll start because a couple of things both Shubhra, actually all three of you spoke about that I think I resonate with, and I've been thinking about for a couple of years. During lockdown is when I started thinking about it. So firstly, are we building? Why must we build, right? I think that's this occurred to me about 10 years back, that I realized that so all my learnings are slow cook learnings from the practice. So it takes time. I try and read a lot, but finally, like Ankon says, धंधे पे दुनिया कायम है. So then office आगे काम करना पड़ता है, and then you realize there are certain gulfs that exist. And जब काम नहीं होता, you get time to think about it. Um, so it occurred to me 10 years back that there's a existential crisis for architecture, that if we are heading inexorably towards climate change as we are, and resource depletion is something that is different from climate change. Biodiversity loss is different from climatic change, but they all they feed each other cyclically, but conceptually. And that sort of environmentalistic motivations of architecture that have come in the past 40-50 years, thanks to a larger awareness, is not actually looking at these two things. Resource depletion, climate equity, and biodiversity loss. To behave not only in a humanistic way, but to behave like you're a part of this planet and not some colonial alien power. So I think that when I thought about it, I realized that there was something that happened maybe say about 1,000-2,000 years back, wherein in human evolution, maybe 5,000 years back, in human evolution, we moved into specializations and divisions of labor, and eventually architecture as we see it today is, like many other specializations, a sort of clergy. It's a sort of punditry. It's a specialized knowledge system, completely vested in a hierarchical knowledge system that then, and there is this emphasis on efficiency. There's this thing that even for design, because it's all Why did this happen? So why did people stop? So why are we so excited about? Why does it make us feel like personally happy? I feel gratification, not because of some quirk of personality. I think all human beings have an inherent desire to build themselves. It's like cooking. We all stopped cooking until Master Chef happened. Now, bloody everyone is cooking all the bloody time. Like, so I think as a species, we have an innate desire to make and build. You say pottery, Ankon to is like totally invested in just making with his own hands. I think that is the key missing thing. And when I look at housing and these responsibilities that get passed on to architectural shoulders to say, Arey, you solve the housing problem, man. What have you been doing all this while? तो अभी घर बनाते रहेगा, हाउसिंग प्रॉब्लम कौन सॉल्व करेगा? The problem is, I realized when I did think about housing for many years, is that, but it started in college actually, to look at housing as an economic problem. And then you realize it's actually land ownership and it's tenancy. Because if you possess your own sedentary lifestyle, housing, land, territory, there is very little that prevents you from building it. So-called informal cities are prime examples of that. That however fragile your tenancy may be on a piece of land, it doesn't take much for a human being to build something for themselves, a shelter. So I think this is a moment of reckoning for architecture as we see it today. I think we all have to hunt for values, value systems, propagation mechanisms that have never been architectural and will never be architect. There will never be an architectural software. I reject one of the reasons why unnamed software companies are I have a inherent dislike for, is that certain unnamed software companies, when you open them, they say you appear to be using a future version of software if your software is hacked. So that means you know what your future version is. You're just not keeping it away from the market, you know. So you're not aiding innovation, and therefore you are not an architectural company. You're a company, right? An architectural software company. With an architectural, so I feel philosophically, my belief has now become that we are momentary specialists. We are the if we have to get joy out of what we do, we have to be the inherently polymath the every human being desires to be. And part of that polymath thing is not only knowledge systems and the intellectual development. It is understanding the inherent relationship with making and building and your own sense of self-worth, self-value, joy, completion of soul. Those sort of DNA level things. Building for other people is barely 500 years old, 1,000 years old. Like it's you count it considering the evolution. Like I said, ceramic technology, thousands of years, architecture, few hundred years. So I think we have to look at ourselves from that perspective. And to Ankon's instigation, I feel if we sort this, if other people sort their problems out, that is, if this whole land policy politics, who owns land, who deserves to be a city dweller, who is an outsider, who is an immigrant, what is the cause of immigration, who is taking over society, who is dominating it, who is getting oppressed, all these questions in terms of land politics, if that tenancy of land is securable in any socio-economic condition, then you can perhaps uh, de uh, disempower architectural punditry that we are all part of right now, and allow people with for us to kind of assist people to build for themselves. I think that is actually the truly most sustainable. Then we don't have to think of mechanisms or technologies of building. We restrict ourselves to the kind of struggles of ideas that Shubhra is suggesting. And in those senses, AI and all stop being professionally analyzable tools, but start becoming, and not even market analyzable tools like Google, that Google has 90% market domination. That's not what success is. But it is, say, the idea that a 3D printer can become like a cell phone plus a desktop printer and can exist in every street corner, so that you can go and 3D print your repairable component of your home instead of calling a contractor, getting an MCD clearance and so on and so forth, the assemblies of these components are already inherently hardwired into whatever form of uh, hallucination a master plan at that future time is. Uh, so, because if AI has a go at the master plan, given what has been the content of master plans for so many years, it will hallucinate. There is no doubt about it. It will be a deviant master plan. And that's the nature of master plans. Uh, so I think that the idea that there is a way of what we call intelligence, which is basically a prompt-driven identifier of a most common response to a prompt, right? That nature of generative AI as it is now, which also is in its extreme infancy, right? It's also babbling like a baby right now. So we have to discount for that. I feel that then becomes the sense of how an enabler again, to allow the world's populace to imagine their own homes themselves and have the ability to take component-based building models that can help make that home for themselves. Go down to their local desktop publisher, Kirane ka dukan type establishment, buy bits and pieces and assemble themselves, and be able to talk about it after a glass of whiskey in a family dinner and opine to your relative how you have built a better house than he or she has. I think that's the ideal future for me, where I'm no longer an architect talking to people at dinner saying, "Aapke sealan ke kya haal hai aajkal?"
IKEAification of.
Well, I wouldn't say IKEA. See, again, IKEA is a market-driven. It's a consumerist market. Its motivation is to sell product. I think the motivation has to be in a nature of, how shall I say this? What kind of technology? The motivation has to be like a PCO. Why did the government license PCOs at that point in time? It filled a gap. The government could not supply everyone with a private wired telephone. So they said, okay, let's allow PCOs. Then it became a sort of a socio-economic micro hub in the community while they were around. And then it got killed by the next thing, which is cell phones. So not smartphones as of right now, but the Nokia old dumb phone, you know, because when you saw, so what's the difference? Why that is a better technology, the kind of technology that is my ideal technology and not smartphones is, it wasn't app based, there was nothing proprietary. And you could, I have seen, and I remember then, and then I was doing a project for street vendors, for which then we did some research on what was happening with cell phones in Africa. Absolutely illiterate people were using the cell phones in a symbological way, and creating patterns and languages of their own, and being able to do even hawala type business without actually being literate on a text message cell phone thing. And the idea that at that time a text message was uh, cheaper than a voice call uh, gives you a sense of how wrong, in terms of the potential, that people are actually capable of much more diverse form of communication when they are not able to talk to each other. And all this is other than, the Twitter world nonsense and hallucinations of other kinds that happen. That's garbage. But what I'm saying is, when you look at how deeper technology can go. So my hope with AI is that there is non-governance, non-market, but an individual empowerment of creativity, content creation, ideation, iteration, simple tools that are available, that then connects with very simplified desktop construction, systems. And then we just stop falling into the trap that we are pundits or popes and clergy like, and we stop having conversations that are fakely hyper technology, like water seepage. I mean, come on, man. It's not rocket science. It doesn't need to occupy so much of our expertise, so called, as we perceive it, because other people ask us, because clearly we are saying that we are waterproofing experts. So I think that those those ideas of why, like Shubhra says, why are we doing what we are? What is the motive? What is the relationship? What are the ethics of what we are doing? We are able to make that the basic pedagogy of architecture, rather than the techniques of architectural production and architectural consumption. If you this, we talk about what light means to the human soul or human uh, ethics, what sound does to the natural environment around a settlement. How do we think about that? How do we look at the increasing types and forms of urban flooding as a field of architectural intervention, rather than as a crisis? यार सरकार खड्डे ठीक नहीं करती, हम तो बिल्डिंग आलीशान बनाते हैं, सरकार खड्डे ठीक नहीं करती. Apply your mind to things like that. Look at pedestrianization as opportunity to enhance social integration. Think of that architecturally. And then AI, I mean, if you start prompting AI with these questions, then we're in business, right? Then you got a game on.
Yeah.
We
The
are
other
so
thing
rooted
is-
in just to like expand on that, we are so rooted in the kind of how do I put it, like the regulations around whatever is allowed and what is not. And you spoke about land ownership, which I completely agree. And the last sentence that you said, like, okay, the land is mine and I'm going to develop it, and the outside footpath belongs to somebody else, outside that the metro belongs to somebody else, and then the road belongs to somebody else, and everybody.
And then bolte ho money, everything is owned by money. तुम्ही ने तो बेचा.
So exactly, so it's like, everybody has this attitude that, oh, that's not my problem, and that seeps into everybody who are working in this whole economy, right? So I don't know, like the Fab Lab neighborhood sort of a thing that you said, where you go, you print your own thing and you come, and that's like fabulous. But in a city that is already so complex and chaotic, and it is an extremely dense and urban environment, most of the cities in India, which are like right now the super cities, are in this situation. How do we actually insert something like AI to make sure that the newer projects that we are building can actually accommodate these things? So one of the things that you mentioned is that we need to have that discourse about these topics as well. So when we interact with, say, ChatGPT or some other AI software, so maybe that's a way to tie these two things together. Maybe that's what it can be. Is that what you were driving towards?
Yeah, I mean, look, I'm saying the decentralization, disaggregation, the sort of propagation of a decentralized way of thinking about building, construction, owning, inhabiting. Even this idea of sedentary means a permanent thikana, which is agricultural sense of a home, like agricultural revolution time sense of a home, to apartment migrant based sense of urban living, which is an industrial revolution sense of a home, to online avatar home in a AR virtual world being a sense of a informationally networked society. I think those paradigms keep shifting, right? But the fundamental thing in India, like you said, India's big city problems are not, to quote External Affairs Minister Jaishankar, India's big city problems are not its villages' problems. But
True.
then I should, I think that India's big cities, right, are imploding. They are not exploding. The core, the rot is in the core, in the insides, in the guts of the city. The skin is fair and lovely because the periphery of any city is awesome sauce. But that is not urbanization. The real urbanization boom is happening in the smaller cities, which are actually effectively large, expanded rural settlements. And there are these hallucinating master plans have not yet been implemented. There are ways of working there where if the prompt to the AI or the DM, district magistrate or municipal commissioner of a small town is plugged into some form of AI enablement, envisioning enablement, chat GPT enablement. And if that is somehow I have to come at the end of the day, you can't get rid of pundits, right? So we will come back in a sort of a curated,
But then
edited
again,
manner.
who does that
तो
planning,
थोड़ा हमें
right?
भी project मिल जाएगा उसमें से. No, I'm just saying, I feel that there is a way in which, because that's the nature of this technology. It's not restricted to a profession or a specialization. Anyone can do it. I think we have to think of ways in which that can be enabled and curated and guided in a responsible way. Because of all the hallucinations we've been exposed to, we know what it can become, and we can sort of step in and do something of value here. And think of these bizarre thoughts like traffic jam hai, can we use that as an opportunity for education through architecture? I don't know. I mean, that, those sorts of bizarre um, senses of what could happen beyond visualization or discourse built narrative, right? I just wanted to say.
Every time we are confronted with new ways of doing things, technologies, or even new problems, I think in a way, this whole business of self-examination can never be too far away. So what I got from what he was saying was that how can we talk about change that is already affecting us, not just AI, but even in terms of the ecosystems and the ecologies within which we are practicing, and yet assume that our profession will never change. So at the heart of, I think, if I understand Madhav, is with every, whether decade or every era when change concentrates in terms of how it is affecting us, it has to prompt our way of thinking about who and what does an architect do? And if we continue to sort of, in a sense, acknowledge and celebrate architecture and architectural projects. A student recently asked me, what is an architectural project? Why don't you just, but where architecture lies within the larger sort of a palette of where we've been practicing, if we don't change that, then we will constantly be hand-wringing in terms of, whatever, but I still want to, at the end of the day, make that farmhouse or make that school, or if we are extremely sort of ethically, we feel community oriented, then whatever your kindergartens and things. But what doesn't change is, again, this idea that we are, as human, I mean, architects are human beings as well. We are problem solvers. The point is, which problems do we now solve? That was the next point that Madhav was trying to make.
No, actually, sorry, not to, very briefly, not problem. I think inherently we should identify ourselves as opportunity seekers.
Opportunities.
Not problem
Yes,
solvers.
yes, yes, absolutely. Where are the next opportunities? Perfect. It's a little more optimistic in that sense, but also
it is also less reductionist, less
yes,
prescriptive.
absolutely,
It's
absolutely. Absolutely. So if we are opportunity seekers, where are the next set of opportunities? And I'll give you, because Ankon, you said, personalize it a little bit, bring it proximate. And I'm a great one at making our situation proximate, close to us. I'll give you 3 examples. One is, in the field of conservation, for instance, what I have seen is, and then go back to what Madhav was saying in terms of opportunities, because this is, trust me, building up to something, I hope. What I was really curious, I've been involved in something for the last 10 years now, more actively previously, now just in terms of where I haven't been to the field for several years, but it's a masonry structure, right? 5,000 years old. And what I was really struck by is, with every whatever those laser scanning, photogrammetry, etc., to make everything transparent so that we can see how deep a foxhole is and all that in this masonry structure, for every bit of that, minutely analyzed, the team also always had people who were literally drawing every brick by hand. And that was not because the machine couldn't do it, but it was, you are using that time to get close to your area of intervention. And so that proximity never goes away. So that is one example where the coexistence is not lip service. The two are doing completely different things. The scanning is making sure nothing is missed, but the proximity is ensuring you know how to read the scans. Because you have all this data, but how do you read it? So it is increasing literacy of the data that is generated. How do we interact with it? And to Madhav's point, where are the opportunities? That is an intensely creative discipline, no? To be able to kind of figure out where the next opportunity is. The second is way back in the early 2000s, right? At least in the US, there was this big push towards prefab. Everything is prefab because, I mean, rightly so, labor is very expensive for all sorts of reasons. And so the more things could be factory inspected, factory regulated, and there were great justifications for it, obviously, from waste reduction to everything, you know, that you're minimizing that in a controlled environment. You're producing things that then come onto site. Now, most architects, because that's why I asked the question about the potter's wheel and the pot, that most architects thought that it's in what is being made in the factory that is architecture. But what people began to find is the opportunity lay in when the prefab met the site. Because that was still not, you couldn't control. It's like what Seeja said, every site is different, regardless. So the opportunities lie in the meeting of the two. And so even if you see industrial agriculture now, there might be, instead of 200 human beings, there are two now sitting, but there still are those two to take care of the meetings, the places of connection between two mediums and two modes of thinking or practicing. So that is another example where I feel what you need to train yourself for, therefore, is not production, but it is in this, the identification of opportunities, which is critical thinking in a sense. Elementary school teachers will tell you that the task of teaching today is why critical thinking, because we are training students for professions that don't even exist as yet. And it's the same in everything. So this skill-based thinking that is going on in universities currently is so short-sighted in that sense, because that's going to become, and that's where all the fear of AI comes, and a certain unnecessary romanticism of hand drafting or human labor persists. I mean, of course, there are politics to that, which I'm very close to. I have healthy skepticism about replacing everything in a sense, but there's a healthy part of this making that Madhav talked about, and a certain sense of self in being able to make rather than outsource. And the last sort of example that I want, all these are tied, is personally, I practice alone, like that Chinese architect example you gave. And it has never, fine, if there are already tenders out there that say that I need to demonstrate 100 butts on seats, fine, I won't even go after that project, or maybe get into partnership with something if I really want the project. But what I have discovered is, it's actually, I can handle a 10,000 square foot or 100,000 square foot school just as well as a 10-person firm or a 20-person firm, because certain knowledge is already there about why we are making and what is needed even when we are drawing. So that drawing is not just an endless, and with every project, you, depending on what your capacity is, you're constantly innovating your drawing set, keeping in mind conventions of communication and not the form of the drawing set. So it is, in fact, technology helps, because I've been using Revit and BIM since 2005, and the extent of BIM actually depends on my consultants and contractors and not on me in that sense, because I have done a completely BIM integrated hospital project, as well as somewhere where I am doing certain things at my end, and then adapting to a completely non-technological environment. But it just makes you more creative and adaptable, because part of being opportunistic, which is a positive attribute now, is being able to adapt around core principles. And the core principles at the level of practices, what is a drawing set for? Not how many sheets do you need, storyboard it, because AIA or the Council of Architect equivalent says you need so many floor plans, so many, or worst is specifications. That, AIA master spec, for instance, will tell you a sealant, for instance, Madhav. That spec section, if you go by the master spec program, it's bloody 20 pages long. And thanks actually to a mentor I was working with, you can do it in 2 pages if you know what it is that as an architect you need to communicate in terms of the performance a sealant is supposed to make, and not get caught up in other things. So it in fact clarifies, if you're willing to, and that's why, again, back to critical thinking, you must always be asking why. What is the purpose of whatever it is that you're doing, whether it's a drawing set as an intern, a toilet elevation, or whether it is, I hate to make this distinction between concept and toilet elevations, because, hey, I still love to do those, because in those small projects are the most, sometimes the most glorious bits of opportunities, that apart. But what I'm saying is, back to what Madhav was saying, at the end, with every wave of challenge to the way you're doing things, it is exactly that. You have to think about, therefore, where does my role of the architect actually reside? And sometimes it will go against the current status quo. Last example, and then I'll shut up, is the Council of Architecture, AIA, and the states, everything talks about your contracts based and payment based on cost of works, right? Especially the most retarded.
IIA, not AIA.
IIA, sorry. Most retarded way of doing things, because, for instance, I had a client who wanted to build a new house exactly where his old house stands. And because I knew him, over time, we were talking about why he needs a new house, what is this house going to be about, blah, blah, blah. And you use all your training as an architect to talk about what a house is, a domestic unit, blah, blah, blah. Make a long story short, what we came to realize is, with a few tweaks, a new house was not needed at all. Now, I'm still trying to figure out, how do I present that on my website, in a lecture, to submit for an architectural award? We don't recognize this idea of, because on the face of it, I have talked myself out of a project. But when I think about it, that was the project, to think with the client about what a house is. And then everything will follow. If we wanted to really scan the existing house for its structural integrity, blah, blah, blah. But if you don't ask the right question, all technology is worthless, because it's what Madhav was saying. It's where is your project? And at the end of the day, that is what is the most optimistic, that, that is the only way that things remain exciting, that the frontier is not set. You just keep going in terms of, so yeah, anyway, those were few examples.
Shubhra, I'm going to latch on to this last thing that you talked about. How is our relationship with clients and also consumers, and distinguishing the consumer as separate from the client? We are architects, right? So we are creating something for consumers. If you are building for the government may be the client, the consumer is somebody else. how are these relationships, where we are talking now about our intelligence first coming into play, like you're saying, before the artificial intelligence comes into play, saying to first identify that, घर की जरूरत है भी कि नहीं है, and you just, and for that, the architect is respected and getting paid rather than by the square foot. And in that context, uh, do you feel, because from the earlier, things that Manav has also said and you've also said, I'm kind of sensing a network and nodes kind of thought, where literally it's like DIY. So when I said IKEAification, I didn't mean the commodification of furniture, but I meant DIY. The DIY meets Amul Cooperative meets Dabbawalas kind of hybrid world where uh, all of this packs into a solution which is accessible to the lowest denominator in a very democratic way, which is what Madhav was kind of alluding to. But the problem is that AI is all in that layer which is accessible at the moment virtually, whereas a lot of architecture and lived experiences in the physical realm. In the last panel discussion, which was pertaining to AI in architecture live, one architect from Kerala said that there's hardly any documentation of Laurie Baker's work or of that kind of Kerala architecture, the rat trap bonds and so on and so forth in the online realm. So you can give a prompt saying Zaha Hadid type of architecture, and it will throw out hundreds of examples. But if you say maybe a Laurie Baker type of architecture, nothing comes up, because there is no network and nodes background to that online. So when we posit this, so we have to now, do we need to like very quickly as the architecture community saying that we want all this information to be fed into the AI? There's that urgency. I feel that if you need to use the AI to our ends and do all these things, that
I think that's a very interesting question that I've also thought long and hard about in this context of, I would say, networks and nodes of a kind. In a sense, non-codified or non-codifiable, uncodified systems or networks. So if I look at mainstream architecture within the ambit of master planning, within the ambit of architecture seen as an urban phenomenon, taught as a secondary or a tertiary education after, so it's a structured hierarchical system of producing formal architecture, formal city, codified, not specified, so prescribed. Everything is prescribable, and the prescriptions are of a benchmark that is minimum standard, right? So what COA does is it maintains minimum standard of education. Every architectural college gives a degree which then gets you a license of a minimal standard of, to ensure things don't fall down, people don't die, cholera doesn't spread, things like that. That's a baseline bottom net sort of thing. I think the DIY that Ankon you mentioned, and also this idea that are we, how do we understand the role of what we're going to do in this future, which is AI enabled? I think if we were to do some sort of thinking through this, the correct thing, as Shubhra, I also obviously completely endorse that. I think part of the reason why I feel happy coming to work every day is because it is, for me, opportunities, opportunism, so on and so forth. But I know I'm very, very privileged. Now, the world of information and the world of knowledge has been kept shackled and boxed, and has its evolution of the world of knowledge has been truncated by silos. And AI today is ML, machine learning, is learning from a pool of knowledge from time immemorial, as supplied to it through the internet network, which also, honestly, the internet's patina of original requirement from the Defense Department of the US is pretty clear when one sees what's happening on Twitter. So I think that the patina persists on what it actually does to benefit society, outwardly and inwardly. But I think that there is a certain system of knowledge that AI has tapped into now. There is a general sense through the information revolution as it is happening in front of our eyes of this push for not democratization is a difficult word, because there is policy and governance involved in through democracy. You have to govern democracies. Humanity is not instinctively democratic. So I think it's a disaggregation, it's a scattering, it's an increasing in diversity, to look at it positively. Disaggregation, people get scared because aggregator का जमाना है, तो disaggregation बोल रहा है means things are falling apart. And my point was that this idea that things can disperse, seeds can disperse, some are hit fertile ground, some hit ground of adaptable conditions where the plant grows and adapts, and trees create avenues on urban roads because of truck height rather than bullock cart heights in rural, bus heights and bullock cart heights. So I think those sorts of watching those wonders pan out and having a tool that helps you perceive the complexity, maybe not understand it completely, but perceive it, I think is the true power of where we are heading. I think that hallucination is a good thing to talk about in this context, right? What we are afraid of. What if AI is irresponsible? It is irresponsible. It is an infant right now, right? Any infant left without parental shepherding and guidance there's no telling what will happen to that kid. One, it can, it's not like orphans do not become good human beings. It's not like, products of large nurturing joint families are perfect human beings, are not despicable. So I think there are many conditions that we are burdening AI with at a very early age. I think the questions persist. What Shubhra started off with, and what Seeja articulated, and what even Ankon, I mean, like as an artist, right? Your questions are hyper futuristic, and they are pulling out thoughts and ideas that are prehistoric. So when you say should we populate, yes, I mean आजकल तो IT cell का जमाना है, but I think that population should not have, I think we should just populate for the joy of populating with examples, expressions, knowing and trusting that the more diverse these ideas are, more sources of geographical, cultural, social, economic context these ideas come springing forth from, AI will, pendulum will swing in those directions. Right now, its job as a generative tool is specifically to respond to prompts with the most common response. That's why Zaha is called Laurie Baker. तो वन कैन आर्ग्यू भी यार लॉरी बेकर पीछे रह गए हैं, उनका थोड़ा कंटेंट एनहांस पुश करो, कंटेंट पुश करो. But perhaps Laurie Baker's architecture is best not understood through photographs. It is understood through ideas of labor relation. So you are better off doing site-based TikTok videos of Laurie Baker content rather than finished buildings, reels, so that then AI gets the truest sense of Laurie Baker, a person who basically adapted, immersed in like you imagine the cultural jump the man made, and that is what is really scary. When people make cultural jumps, then cultural production hierarchies feel extremely threatened. अरे भाई कहाँ से ये कौन सा आइडिया, तुम तो Pinterest लेके आ जाते हो बार बार. अरे लाने दो ना भाई. I mean, I'm saying tomorrow when I have to design a house, if my client starts getting onto mid-journey, instead of saying like I want this, like I want that, she's like, actually he or she curates that image for me and said, मेरे को ऐसा कुछ बना के दो. Why should I feel threatened? भाई
No,
आधा काम
that's
किया.
really good because it's actually using a prompt and using it like a visualization tool for what you're not able to think and draw.
More the
So
better.
it's much
Seeja, this is
easier.
the other thing, intellectual product, another byproduct of codifying and punditry, right?
Hmm.
IP. Arey,
No, agreed.
you know,
It's also sacred. It's like a inner sanctum of a
अभी
temple.
मेरा मेरा
Nobody
बिल्डिंग
cares. I
कॉपी
don't
कर
know
लिया,
why
क्या
they
मतलब
read.
कॉपी किया वो
And
अलग
and
बंदा है,
it all it also becomes a point of meeting you with meeting your client in the sense because it starts a discussion.
And
Kya,
it's
what
such
do
a
you
targeted
like
reference,
about
it's like
this image?
completely targeted.
Kahan se aaya? It's if nothing else, it gives you more information.
The best litmus test is when you talk to a client, the first meeting, right? And you say, when you start that thing of what you encourage them to describe what they want, right? And then you realize the sort of pressure on the client, you can perceive them sort of like stage fright.
Yeah, they go into a shell, like you have to.
And then they feel like, oh my God, I have to communicate. Then they start spouting your bad jargon at you. They say, minimalism and something, and then, of course, everything should be sustainable. And then that is why we are coming to you. आप तो बड़े green architect हो. So I think that whole those sort of awkward sort of crutches and grasps that even we are prone to, right? If we're thrown in the spotlight and said, "Arey, explain to me what has been the trajectory of Indian architecture in a tweet or something," I'll make an Insta reel. You gonna talk about now? Start now. Okay, this didn't go down. Start again. So that that like compression of complex and intensely personal ideas and thoughts into chewable chunks is a pressure.
Yeah, it's very reductible actually. It doesn't work in a way that you expect it to. I think these visualization tools are helping us do that, and people who they don't understand it. If this is how they show it, it's easier.
The best parties are the biggest parties. So you should have more and more people come to the party, and that's
Riveting conversations with different groups of people with different mindsets. It's
you
always
just
better.
ensure your Google search thing is exposed to enough diversity. Don't keep searching for the same thing.
Same things. Your cards are misleading.
And which also means that along with being data consumers, we kind of have to be data generators. My mom keeps telling me, that she's finding a trove of all sorts of obscure Hindustani music recordings on YouTube. And I say, well, for every one, or at least every 10 you download, upload one.
Yeah.
If you're in the position of, in a similar position of having precious recordings. Similarly, if you are going to upload something, and that's why I like those academia sites and all, if you upload a PDF of your work or something you have generated, there is parity. So somewhere you talked about resource equity or something. Data is exactly that. I stopped using Facebook because it was so easy, not because I'm ideologically against it or anything, that's a different conversation, but what I realized is it was becoming so easy for me to just keep forwarding things that were generated by someone else and claiming a certain whatever validation through
like you found it, right?
It's no different from a selfie, look what I'm reading now. Like as though I have written it. So, I mean, to your optimistic sort of a future, currently where we find ourselves in, it is kind of part of the creative act is also to be able to generate whatever it is to upload so that the party becomes bigger.
There's a history of Napster, right? When peer-to-peer exchange had happened on music, right?
Yeah.
I think it was a critical historical moment that I think people will talk about a few years from now. Because that was the first time a monetizable IP content, which was held by recording studios, was I mean, it was a fantastic challenge that Napster threw up. Conceptually fantastic and executed at a scale that was breathtaking. I mean, I can imagine the top management of Sony, BMG, all these music companies would have been frightened like what, because it happened like that.
Yeah.
Right. And I think that fear is what is the, I get the same when I read about it. I was like, shit, this is exactly like the IIA. Like IIA is actually Sony BMG, you know,
Yeah.
that you are this, you are somehow the protector, the vanquisher, the conqueror, the territorial expanding empire building entity, institution, and you are the gatekeeper, and you will, and together you will achieve some form of institutional greatness for the profession. These sort of, there's a background of Star Wars that plays.
Literally, I
Darth
was thinking of
Vader.
the Empire from
Yeah,
Star
exactly.
Wars. I was like, you're literally explaining what they do.
No,
And now,
this
And
IIA, and the thing is, I think folks in IIA didn't sign up to be empire builders. They just want to kind of chat about architecture in a harmless sort of way. I think that this 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 mandate given, it's I think we're making these things too parallel to how social politics is building, this sort of idea of cultural hegemony or cultural assertion, or
yeah.
politics of the right and politics of the left and equity and so on and so forth in a political prism. But I feel, as creative, like people who produce ideas, the biggest challenge for us to adapt to, and actually use as an opportunity again, is the content. Reason why Ambani calls data new oil is, we stopped after Napster and peer-to-peer exchanges of bits of information, which then logically becomes a social media avatar is WhatsApp, is that you create silos of communities that become echo chambers. Peer-to-peer networks are, because they rely on trust of a peer. You trust a peer more rather than an entity that is different from you. I think that puts some very critical questions on society, and for architecture and design to adapt to the idea that we are not the only people who should, could, would be designing buildings, and that's okay. It's okay. We don't have to protect and gatekeep our profession in this sort of really, like, honestly, psychotic way. So it's a psychosis. It's
And
a fleeing
also
psychosis.
and in that, the actual, again, the underpinning, what is at the heart of authorship that supposedly they're trying to protect is
Yeah.
responsibility and accountability. That is all.
Yeah.
But it's sort of gotten aligned more to the recognition and the sort of reputation, as Kevin would say often, um, of associated with the authorship, rather than actually what, like, the ideal scenario in this sort of sharing of data is that you always are responsible enough to provide the context for the content you have uploaded, so that you are constantly reminding people this evolved under these circumstances. Again, going back to what we began with, the relational circumstances are at the core of our world. I mean, when you talk about ecology, it's all about these delicate, extremely important relationships, rather than universalizing and removing something from its relational circumstance into something that can be replicable. So far, I mean, so even the manner in which we think of efficiency, therefore, needs to change, just like what we think the architectural project is needs to sort of shift. But that's what makes it exciting.
yeah. It's AI, like ultimately we can have questions that we speak about what architecture itself is. And there is another part of it which can just at today's scale increase efficiency, not in the scale that, so see, planning problems are inherently very difficult, yeah, wicked, right? Like there are so many books written about it, how they are, so there are preferences, there are absolute parameters. So the parameters are all lopsided. It's not something like you can't put a typical computation algorithm and solve a planning problem. They are very complex. So there is no way that we can actually solve a problem that is going to be optimal, but we can always find some feasible solutions. And also at the same time, there are a lot of systems in this, like you said, that one project, instead of 10 people, I can do it myself, because you have actually introduced a lot of efficiency in your process, because the process itself has become so efficient. So I think this is going to add that level of efficiency to just make sure that a lot of manual processes are going to take into computing, and we are going to reduce the 500 people to 10 people and so on and so forth. And that also kind of levels the playing field. I'm sure there needs to be changes in tenders that go out, which also allow people from different backgrounds and different sizes of firms to come in. But once that is introduced again, and it's not all about turnovers and how many projects you've done with the government, etc., it's going to change this landscape to open it up more. I think in the next 5 years, that opening up will be seen a lot, like even with the fact that we are able to participate in a lot of government tenders, even though we've not done that before, because that's already happening on another level. So that's something that's going to, decentralize this entire process, which is like the empire from this.
So
Yeah. Darth Vader.
ultimately, it seems that after talking 2 hours about AI, that it's not at all about AI, it's about human behavior. Eventually, how humans behave and how humans take to it and how humans respond
A
to
very,
it.
sorry, very human lack of intelligence.
A very human lack of intelligence, or too much of, intelligence, maybe also. So thank you so much to this panel for a very, very engaging 2 hours. पता ही नहीं चला 1 बज गया. And yes, we've been gabbing and listening to very, very interesting trains of thought. My brain artificial network has gone in many directions. I've taken lots of notes also. I'll push this across to Rajesh to kind of help him structure the final edit. Thank you again. Rajesh, over to you to just, close this session.
Thank you. Thank you, Ankon. If I remember correctly, Ankon, you wanted to also show some of your work where you are using AI or exploring technology. Would you like to do?
I can. It now feels a bit facile compared to all the stuff that we've talked about. But if you enable the screen sharing,
Akriti, if you are there, you can do that.
Yes, I've started the screen sharing, I think.
thank
Sure.
you. So I'll be quite quick about it. I am a dabbler, sort of in the sense that Madhav also is. But primarily, sort of the economics of the studio has pushed me more and more to being an artist and a sculptor than an architect. So in 2021, I got this fabulous opportunity to be part of a 2 artist show where, of course, Raza was no more, but I was asked to respond to 6 of Raza's works by creating some works of my own. So I created 6 works, and there were 6 of his canvases which were kind of there. So it was like a conversation between, it wasn't a conversation, it was a one-way conversation, because I responded to his works and created 6 works of mine, which then was shown online and offline. So this it happened. The show got over and everything, and then in 2022, which was 1 year later, I had this sense of hubris from having been in a 2 artist show with Raza, that suppose Raza were there and we were given the brief that the other artist in the show is Ankon Mitra, how would you respond to his works, sort of thing. And I put AI to it, and from among some of the responses, these two were really fabulous ones, that AI kind of threw out to me. These were on DALI 2. And I thought these were like very perceptive of the kind of work I do and how it kind of juxtaposes against the Raza's style, for lack of a better word. But the original name of the show, coined by Apparao Galleries, was called Structured Tension. I really felt that even in the work. So I felt this definitely the word intelligence in artificial intelligence is not very misplaced. There is some intelligence working here. And now moving on to more mundane things. So there is one project which we are doing with we have an NDA, and also I can't name the architect or the client or anything or even the site. But he's building, as he does, he's quite a well-known architect, does these white boxes, different white volumes of this thing, and we are the landscape architects for them. So as an initial this thing, I was having a conversation with the architect. So he said, and he speaks English a bit haltingly. He's Japanese. So he said, against my white, there should be these grids of green, and different kinds of, the morphologies of green. I don't want to see any other color. So that was his brief to me in terms of, the landscape. And he said in terms of ecological things, species of plants, the experience of the landscape and everything, you call the shots. But my only brief to you is this visual brief. So we did many iterations of this in sketches, and then I thought, let me try it on Mid Journey. And Mid Journey threw up these, and I felt some of them. We started in the iteration process. We started adding details like I want an acacia tree, or I want a grove of certain kinds of plants, or I want topiary of a certain nature. In the prompts, we started putting those. We want certain species of bamboo. And as I saw the iterations going, and this is similar to how Seeja might also be like when we do phenotypes, genotypes in coding, it improves over this thing. So sometimes, as we say, that the first thought is a great thought, that may be true, but in with prompts, if keep refining the prompts, then the outcomes start getting better and better. So that was my experience of this, and actually something quite refined came out eventually in the landscape, to the extent that the team said कि अब तो हमें design ही नहीं करना पड़ेगा, ये तो देख के बस we just need to translate this into the whole final kind of landscape scheme. So I dabble a bit in fashion.
Just sorry to jump in, Ankon, this idea of one of the things related to earlier part of our conversation. What do we teach in college now? This prompt vocabulary, prompt writing. So I think now it's even got a specialization called prompt engineering. But I think that's really where pedagogically, design architecture in particular needs to stand. Then the challenge will be, who are the people who are able to think in English, who are not, and is that really a hurdle in our colleges? Because that's been the problem for time immemorial in architecture colleges from dissertation. Sorry, I just wanted to mention this idea of prompt writing. It just occurred to me when you said.
No, you've raised a very important point, because I've been questioning for a very long time why AutoCAD is not available in our native languages.
I think it soon will be going the way it is. Yeah.
It should, because I think just the Prime Minister was saying something yesterday. They said that there's going to be a Google AI lab now in India, where they are going to work on 17, 18 Indian languages. So if our movies, dubbed movies of English can be available in multiple, like Telugu, Tamil, Marathi on Netflix, why should AutoCAD not be available in, and that to my mind will immediately open up a lot of local intelligences to become a part of this AI revolution. So
Further to this point that you both are making, language, and the other thing I feel that more than language, it's is communication a big part of architecture? And as a profession, as architects, should we be good communicators and
Yes.
storytellers?
Yes, we
That's
should.
something that, yeah, I mean, I completely agree. But the point is that the education system is not actually reinforcing that idea. And the more and more we meet people, like it's such a funny thing that it just happened day before yesterday. I was taking an interview and the person could not explain their projects. Forget about an introduction, the project explanation was not there. And that's something that generally we see when it comes to personality and talking about other things, people kind of falter, but at least project explanations they can do. So we really try to put him at ease and speak about it a lot, so that at one point I was explaining the project to him to tell him that this is how you should do it. But why is that not being integrated in the education itself? Because ultimately, to have conversations like these, the one that we had today, you need to be a thinker, you need to be an articulator, and you need to actually flesh out your ideas that you're thinking about. And we this profession is not as isolated as something in tech is, wherein you can be alone and you can make something happen. This is such a people oriented thing. So maybe the prompts itself can make us think, make us write. The other end of it is that ChatGPT will write prompts for us, so we'll write it even lesser.
Seeja, that's actually it. The thing is, I recall
Yeah.
about 10 years back, I started guiding dissertations, and I asked at the School of Planning and Architecture, I won't name who I asked, that one of the students had come to me and said they want to write it in Hindi, and I wanted to do it. And it was summarily dismissed, the proposal. And I was told it is because we don't have the capacity for it institutionally in the college. And I told the person that the capacity is standing in front of you. I am that capacity. I will guide this dissertation in Hindi. Just accept it, because I can't accept it. I'm visiting faculty. It just summarily dismissed.
Not go through.
Go ahead.
Now, I feel that there is a vestige of a responsibility education institutions feel that they must qualify people for a certain enhancement, perceived enhancement by jargonizing language. And that is what we are teaching in architecture school. It's a jumbled babble of jargon, which is completely misunderstood and
thought is so devoid. Yeah.
And when we then ask folks who come from small towns, because that's the other thing that's happened in the past 30 years, is that architecture now, most architects do not come from privileged big cities. They come from tier 3, tier 2 towns. And for them, the architectural profession is an aspirational profession. It's not the logical conclusion of who their family, like the family background brings them to act as being an option, like it was in my case, the privilege. But it is also possible for someone else from completely different social milieu to imagine themselves as a creative thinker, barring this emphasis, because it becomes a huge handicap for confidence, inability to communicate. Therefore, I completely, sorry, Ankon, because this slide and the idea that, and I'm thinking your architect is Japanese, there are communication problems there, but there's a certain confidence with which, like even when we present ourselves in, say, global forum and stuff, initially, there was a huge inferiority complex. What will I say? I've just done a B.Arch and I have no qualifications. But we realized very quickly that, is hammam mein sab nange hain. कोई tension ही नहीं है. So I think that reality, that the lived experience, the knowledge that comes from doing things or from inherited legacy problems that you have a particular insight on because of your socio-cultural milieu is a valuable knowledge asset, where language and prompt writing, and that's what I think, if we want to democratize something in architectural education, it's this ability to say that you have to be able to be a good storyteller. The storyteller narrative skill set is not a mastery of vocabulary in a language. It is the ability to communicate emotion, which is actually what AI needs prompting from us on. Like, it needs us to tell it what is the emotional content of that image. for it to keep fine-tuning its thing. Sorry, Ankon, it just triggered me completely on when you said prompt in this context, you know.
Though,
No,
I
it's,
mean,
it's
just
fantastic.
just to sort of latch on to that, on an optimistic note, there are schools like the one in Rajkot, for instance, the IPSA.
I know,
They're
I know.
bilingual.
Arey, kya pyara
And,
school hai. I was very...
and I remember the first time I'd gone for a review. Thankfully, Gujarati is one of my mother tongues, but I wasn't prepared for it. But what I realized over the course of 2 days, exhausting, because you were suddenly, you had to pay another kind of concentration and attention. But what I realized is there is value in encouraging students to think in the language they think. And it directly, I mean, talking about AI, one of the things that challenges, which should have been continually challenged, is architecture is both a visual as well as a proto-visual, pre or post-visual discipline. That the intangibles that we often talk about
And our
are
language is
thoughts.
meta-visual. It is about visual.
Yes,
The
yes.
other
And so
don't
many
have a
times,
meta-social language yet. Yeah.
and many times our ideas, even of relationships, are before a line is drawn. And in fact, if we draw lines too soon, they reduce the complexity and the richness of thought. And if that we are asking students or ourselves to do in a language that is one we don't think in. And I'm using this not in terms of our language and somebody else's language. It is a language you think in. In my case, it is English. But in somebody else's case, it might be something
Different, yeah.
else. Then a richness begins to develop. And this, I have to admit, guys, I used to be in the camp of architecture as a visual discipline until the last 5 years. And I remember a really, really interesting debate with this friend of mine, Kevin, about the fact that no, there are other aspects to architecture apart from visual. And their language plays a very critical role. Anyway, so the prompt language is just one such language. And anyway, we hear now that in schools, they are beginning to teach coding as a legitimate language. It is just part of the same, I suppose, whole.
So as social engineers, we need to kind of, be very open to discourse, and to be open to discourse in any language that actually is just a medium of thought, right? So to be open to discourse is very important. For that, you need to be able to actually formulate a thought. So this thing has to start right from you when you start your education. Firstly, 5 years is overrated. So you have 5 years. So you should actually introduce these things inside and make sure that people are able to formulate a thought at the end of the day. I think there should be studios dedicated to it. And maybe, through these things, it can start much, much faster, because students just come and, make forms, and it's all about the form and the morphology, how it looks, is the sunlight there. It's all very technical. You kind of lose the social engineering aspect of it at times. I think it will come within, what Ankon is talking about here.
Or that emotional content that Madhav was talking about, that it's not just rain or water, what type of rain, and when. And these things sometimes you have in your sort of, in the language of that place, there are ways to describe rain that another language may not. I mean, that's just one example, which we know in terms of Eskimos, but we forget it applies to us as well.
Or as Ankon can attest, our vocabulary for color, as opposed to
exactly.
Anton's tones.
Yes, color theories, yes.
So that's the difference between, codifying something, that the colors are there, but how do I choose from there?
So which also
blue is the promise, right? But my point is, मुझे blue नहीं चाहिए, मुझे नील चाहिए, या मेरे orange चाहिए, मुझे नारंगी चाहिए. Then क्या करें उसका फिर?
And which brings us to a point we haven't quite so directly touched upon, is all data is conditional. or contextual.
And already defined by the metadata that in the past decade we produced on the on social
Exactly.
media.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
that we
The
forget
past
sometimes.
decade of metadata is what AI's language of learning, I mean, it's
Derivative, yeah.
learning is.
And that's where the potential of AI is also, that the more we put into it, it's like the age-old saying, no, what you put into it is what you will, I mean,
WYSIWYG,
what you get out of it depends on the quality of what you put into it. So, I mean,
what you
it's,
see is what you get also.
yes, yeah.
Oh, garbage in, garbage out. That's the 90.
Yeah, exactly. So it kind
I
of,
think we are reaching like a 2.5 hour mark.
oh,
Are we
sorry,
finally
go
reaching it?
hard.
Lunch
I
break.
just realized
Rajesh
that
is-
it's like
Rajesh
1:30.
is letting us ramble. He's like,
Yeah.
Please
Yes.
go on. It's
Ah,
Like, हम
very
edit कर देंगे, आप
content-
बोलो जो बोलना है.
Raje aggregate कर रहा है, content select कर
I
रहा है.
know.
For me, it's a good content. Yeah.
Yeah, he's
बीच
like,
बीच
हम
में
edit
monetization के बारे में रोता है.
No, anyway, Rajesh, this is a takeaway. Huh? Your next sessions need to be in, you get 4 Marathi architects and get them to do a bilingual session.
I have been trying
English,
to do that.
Marathi,
Madhav, I think, is
English,
ahead
Gujarati,
of this. Yeah.
And also,
English, Gujarati,
yeah,
English, Tamil, you know.
and also perhaps in the evening, so that each of us can sort of, time is not, we are not looking at the watch or the calendar.
Right now
for the
it's lunch o'clock, then it'll be beer o'clock.
हाँ वही तो ना,
Beer
वो beer o'clock
always
में
better, yeah.
ज्यादा discussion होते हैं.
आपको interesting
Okay.
discussions भी मिलेंगे actually.
Let me wrap it up in 5 minutes. So
Sure.
I'm going
Yeah.
a little bit into my territory, which is, sort of what I do more these days, which is working with folding. And at some point, when I got connected with NID and then textile designers and things like that, they were like, how does your folding, interact with, say, the body, for instance? And of course, students who have been working with folds in the workshops and so on, placing paper on the body and doing things with it. And I found that this is a very interesting area where AI is kind of now slightly supporting this side of the practice, where we do some initial sketches with iterations of how to address certain kinds of pleats. So I have this whole jargon of different pleat languages which I am only privy to, and of course the community of folders. And you can put those prompts in and then say that put it on the human body, or put it on the head, or put it on the shoulders, and so on and so forth. And if I can't show that work till it's released in October, the physical final work, but this art in odd places is somewhere where we will be showcasing on output, with the initial input was actually all AI. So that was something in graphic design. Again, this is a pattern making example where we gave us certain series of prompts, and we got some like initial iterations which are sort of like phenotypes, and then kept refining them. So we finally got these which later could become overlaid tracery screen. So quite good actually. I mean, the more and more I kind of delve with it or in it, I realize that it's actually a very enabling tool. If you, again, that prompt language can be refined and made better. I'm just going to wrap up with 2 very interesting examples. We do now what a lot of ephemeral architecture, which is architecture for events and things. And in events, usually it's the impact of the space. People come in and get bound by the first 5 minutes or 10 minutes or something, and we would have a hard time translating some of these, like making major complex like virtual models to kind of show people. So we end up making like a physical model, like a scaled physical model, and then put it in kind of Photoshop or something like that, as multiply it and things like that. That would be the modus operandi to save time, because event deadlines are also very kind of in your face, and they'd be like, the event is in 45 days, so you don't have that mulling time which architecture projects have. Like you have to be like real chop, chop, chop. And what I've noticed is that this one lady came, and she's had these ideas for wedding design. So I said, can you kind of tell me what is it that you're looking at? So I really like your work, and I like these images. And I said, but you said you don't want me to repeat any of my older stuff. So she went back and she came with these mid-journey explorations, where she said that, I've been sitting at the computer for like a day, and these are the things which I like, and she came up with these, and I was quite over the moon, to be, to put it lightly, because this was the first time that somebody had actually come up with original stuff. So they're not Pinterest images saying कि ये copy कर लो. Where I'm always a little hesitant saying ये किसी और artist का काम है. I don't copy other people's work, and then it goes into the spiral saying कि अच्छा हमें तो कुछ ऐसा चाहिए, आप इसका silk थोड़ा ये कर दो, थोड़ा वो कर दो, so that it's no longer copyrighted, and it just goes into very very kind of mucky territory. And here there was somebody who said that they've brought this fresh ideation, and like we were saying that, welcome to clients who come with visual imagery. Now this is available to lay people to kind of explore and bring stuff too, and I was very happy. And now we are doing this project, we are working on the first prototype and everything, and it's in May she came with this, and in July the event is there. So we kind of building this for her now, and it's really good. And I want more and more clients to actually now come with their DALI and mid-journey explorations to me, and at least they have a clear idea. Like Seeja was saying, they don't even know what they want, and they're like, we like your this work, this work, this work, but we want something original. So khichdi aap apne end pe khud hi paka lo, sort of thing. So just and the last thing is actually all text. So because I work with origami technique, and also over the years I have built a repository or a library of information, reading lists, books. So when students ask me, I kind of belt out those to them. I have these saved word files which I share with them. And it took all of half an hour for me now on ChatGPT to try and just give like correct prompts. Holding books relevant for architects and designers. And it coughed up a list of 20, two prompts coughed up a list of 20. And I said, look here, there are actually 3-4 in this which I'm not aware of yet after working in this field for 20 years now almost. And further then refining it, saying that okay, origami mathematics books for architects and designers. And just one name I gave, which I said Eric Demain, I know is a subject expert, he teaches at MIT and so on and so forth. And I knew about a few of his, and now the ChatGPT gave me 4 or 5 other articles of his which I had not come across before. And that's I think it's great for lay people to have access to this kind of collating software, where you just need to be able to give the correct prompt and it gets you started, right? It's a start point. Of course, then you have to delve in and learn more of the jargon, as Madhav is saying, because the jargon words are what you put back into the prompt, so it gives you more detail. But if you are interested, and I'm a self-taught origami, there's no folding techniques, university course anywhere in the world. It's all I've had to learn by being Ekalavya and watching people doing things from a distance, looking at resources online, books, and so on and so forth. And it's really going to decentralize education, I feel, for people who are really interested in teaching themselves about things that they can. And this is the last bit, I feel, where academia is where they kind of hoard information, is now really should start thinking about how to make stuff available so that more and more people can, and they don't become irrelevant. From saying that, our course fee is $200,000, and you will at the end of it be known as, a graduate from the Gund Hall of Harvard GSD. After some point, people say, I have all the information and the knowledge, but I just don't have that degree. And very soon there was this show called Suits. There's an iconic scene there where there's a young lawyer chap who's having a chat, and he's saying, we only hire, people who have degrees from such and such law schools in the US. And there's a book lying in front of that person who's hiring. And the person he's about to rise up and leave because he said, I don't have a degree from those kind of law schools. But you know everything that is there in that book. You just open a page, and so he says page 63, and he says everything that is there on that page. He says, I know everything, but I don't have that degree from that, hallowed portal that you're talking about. And eventually that person knowing everything without having the degree wins the day for him, and he gets the job. Is my point now that the positive thing we can take away from AI is that it's going to enable a lot of percolation of knowledge to strata where earlier that it was behind, lock and key. And that to my mind is one of the most powerful things that, AI can do for us.
I was hunting for it. We didn't actually discuss hallucination and stuff. It's very interesting, especially when you start posing certain types of questions to any form of generative AI. So like you hunted for a known expert in origami, right? I think I recall somewhere, Rajesh might remember. I was trying to kind of scroll through my social media to find it. I don't know if Prem mentioned this experiment he did with ChatGPT. Perhaps Rajesh, you also did. There was some exchange somewhere on Twitter, somewhere where you guys were. Wherein, if you take a non-domain expert, so if you say that what does what does Donald Trump have to say about origami? Then the hallucination kicks in, which is like if Donald Trump were to make origami, what would be uh, what would be the content that style or metadata defined way of thinking would generate? So, it's really, I mean, again, like I said, this is not, I feel that oftentimes in architecture, there has been a sort of lack of engagement with the social milieu in some, so again, it's a form of punditry that we are outside this and we will look benignly from outside and fix the world's problems. I think that sort of, and the politics, that the lack of, the problem is, you imagine that you are devoid of politics, but actually architecture is politics. There is nothing but politics in architecture. So I think that there's this sense that I felt that with how we kind of work with this AI in this sort of recognition, that AI is not necessarily the honest truth. It is an expression of what other people have recognized as the honest truth. So I'm like, and of course one can be all doomsday about it and say, oh my God, deep fakes, then someone didn't actually say this, then what of the citation discipline in academia, and how will that?
Doomsday is more exciting, no? Like it's like watchable content. So people go to that, right?
This
But
example
it's really interesting how that hallucination debate is panning out and what it means for knowledge systems,
It's interesting though. It used to be called experimental histories. This hallucination. Because I remember presenting a paper on my father's history seminars at SEPT, which was all about this, putting two completely, not completely random, but curated categories together in order to generate a new way of looking at history. So, you know, suddenly Sinan is commenting about Corbusier's sketches, and our assignment was we had to actually play along and write like a little play. But the idea being you go beyond the recognized understanding into something that then becomes an understanding of your own. That was what and in that sense, when you say the AI then is a reflection of what we put in. And if we put in prescriptions, what we will get is just that. So it was fascinating.
Great. This is lovely.
Yeah. So thank you so much, Ankon. You want to share something, Ankon? You're on mute.
Oh, he shared a photo. Abdication, absolutely.
Ankon, you're
what we
muted.
were talking about, yeah.
So one of the biggest things that technology has done to humankind is, after the agricultural revolution, it has given primacy to a passivity. Sedentary has become a passiveness, a passive, and we are actually seeing the pinnacle of passive consumption right now. And now we are entering the stage where people who are meant to enhance consumption, like architects, designers, retailers, advertising folks, people whose creativity is being used to enhance scales of consumption, are fundamentally using AI or using technology to abdicate the responsibility that we actually signed up for. Out of, like, no one induced that hallucination. We signed up to be
Absolutely.
responsible.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah.
So
Very
I
true.
think it's a good escape route. हमने नहीं किया, AI नहीं किया.
हाँ, वो कब से मुझे people keep talking about parametricism और मैंने नहीं किया, algorithm से हो गया. I'm like, you make
So you,
decisions.
before that, you were 80s में you used to hear from architect, हमने नहीं किया, client ने करवाया है. It's an abdication of responsibility.